Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn conversation about Industry 4.0. My name is Kevin Wallace, and today we have the opportunity to hear from one of Australia's leading professionals in Industry 4.0, John Broadbent. Welcome, John.
Good afternoon, Kevin, and everybody else who's on the call.
John has dedicated much of his 5-decade career in enabling success in Australian manufacturing. He's developed an enviable reputation through his work on smart factories, facilitation of business improvement, through his mentoring, and of course, his work in Industry 4.0. John currently leads a consulting business named Realise Potential. Throughout this webinar, please raise any questions you have using the Q&A facility. And we will also be seeking your feedback during the webinar via a couple of polls. And finally, this webinar is being recorded so that it can be shared with others who are unable to join us today. So, John, let's begin. How would you define Industry 4.0 in simple terms?
Well, it was a term coined by Germany in 2011 to sort of herald the beginning of what they called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The first one, 1784, was mechanisation, 1870 was electrification, 1969, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, was computerisation. And in 2011, Germany recognised that there were three, I guess you'd call them underpinning technologies or approaches to Industry 4.0 or to manufacturing. And that was the use of what are known as cyber physical systems. Sounds like a complicated term, but basically your car dashboard is a cyber physical system. It takes information from a system below it, like your car engine management system, and puts it on your dashboard so you can see what's really happening. So that's a cyber physical system. In factories, there are things like SCADA systems or even just human machine interface, little panels, you know, which you have in your fridge these days that tells you what your fridge is doing and allows you to order from Woolies. There's also cloud computing. In the early days of, Google Drive and Dropbox and those sorts of things, people were concerned about reliability and security and all that sort of stuff. But now, with AWS, with Azure, with Microsoft, with Google Drive, with OneDrive, Dropbox, people sort of don't care anymore about what the cloud is or where their stuff goes. They just put it there and hope for the best. I'm yet to hear of anyone who's lost a photo, by sticking it out up into cloud storage, and it's become so ubiquitous that we don't even think about it anymore. And the third underpinning piece was what's known as the industrial Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things are things or objects from which we can extract information. It could be a washing machine, a fridge, a car, an industrial piece of kit, but the industrial Internet of Things are the things that we would find in a typical factory from which we can get information, such as robots, control systems, weighing machines, pretty well anything that has an IP address, an internet address, from which we can extract data. So Industry 4 is really a catch-all phrase that holds those three components in it. And it was the convergence of those three things at the same time that allowed us to do some pretty smart things with extracting and manipulating information from manufacturing processes.
So 4 industrial revolutions, but how does this one differ from the previous 3?
They were all singular in the sense of mechanisation, electrification and computerisation. This is really as I said before, a convergence of 3 very distinct technologies that now allow us to mine information inside factory systems through Industry 3.0, which is about connectivity and computerisation, assuming that we have modern equipment, where we've thought about the fact that we need our kit to be connected on a network so we can extract information from it, and the ability then to store that information in the cloud for analysis later on or in real time, and the ability then to extract that information from other parts of the plant, whether it's barcode scanners, check weighers, whatever pieces of equipment we have. What people forget to notice or fail to notice is that Industry 3.0 is that we have a piece of equipment that has maybe an IP address or an Ethernet port that we can get information from it. But a lot of organisations haven't yet made that transition to getting that stuff on a network so they can extract that information and do stuff with it. And when you can collect information from multiple bits of equipment in the Industry 3.0 way, well, then you're poised to now start looking at cause and effect relationships and more real-time information about the status of production on your factory floor.
Thank you, John. Let's have our first poll, and can I encourage everyone to participate in this anonymous poll? So the first question might be, how would you rate your organisation's current use of Industry 4.0? And I think Veronica is putting up the poll now. There's 5 choices. I'd ask people to pick just one of those 5 boxes. Veronica?
Sorry, just launching it now.
Excellent. John, while those results are coming in, how would you describe the current level of engagement of Industry 4.0 in Australia?
So I read a few months ago at the end of 2024 that here was Germany who coined the phrase 14 years ago, and their estimate is that only less than 4% of German manufacturing is on this Industry 4 transformation journey, which I found quite surprising. I think that was quoted by Siemens, but don't quote me. And in Australia, based on my experience, I would say we're probably less than 1%. If you remember, there's a bell curve, which is the law of diffusion of an idea through society. And at the front end, as a new idea emerges, you have like 2.5% of people are called the innovators. You have 12.5% of the early adopters. And then you have 34%, which is the early majority to get to the peak of that bell curve. And then you have the late majority and the laggards that bring up the rear. We're not even at the innovation stage yet, that 2.5%, we're way below that. So while that might be bad news for Australian manufacturing, from the point of view of we're behind the 8 ball, the good news is for manufacturers who start this journey now, the competitive advantage, the early adopter competitive advantage is still there for them. So it's really a clarion call to get on board and start making the changes that you need to make to become more sustainable and do more with less.
John, the results we've got, it's just getting started. Is that the sort of response that you see typical in, say, medium-sized manufacturing businesses?
Across the board pretty well, Kevin. There's a handful, there's pockets of innovation, and we've done some extraordinary stuff in some of those businesses. I see Kevin Hibbins is on the call from Melbourne. G'day, Kevin. Kevin and I worked together for many, many years, and we collaboratively built several smart factories, one of which is pretty well almost what they call a dark factory. There's only 5 people run the entire factory floor, and that was for Coca-Cola, which I'll mention later. But we do have the capabilities, the technology, and the smarts now to be able to make factories so much smarter than they are. And the days where operational people particularly have to spend days, certainly hours, extracting information from monolithic systems like SAP, trying to get the data that they need and then mash it up into spreadsheets only to find that they're where they're meant to be. When I see organisations doing that, I just feel like I want to bash my head against the wall, because we don't need to do that anymore. We've been doing that for 30 years. We need to think about the way we collect, store and deliver information to people who need it, when they need it, in the format that they need it. And we can certainly do that quite well now.
So, John, where Industry 4.0 is being applied, how is that transforming into outcomes for Australian businesses?
We offshored a lot into Southeast Asia, and the typical reason for offshoring was the requirement for labour reduction or cost in labour reduction. But when we look at Coca-Cola's injection moulding facility in Western Sydney, for example, with only 5 people running the factory floor, that factory is world competitive. The machines that they use came from Husky in Canada. There's a world price for those. The PET that they buy is pretty well a global standard price. HDPE, high density polyethylene for the caps, is a pretty standard price. And if we look at, I'll just share this, if we look at someone like Deloitte, who's done some research around this stuff. Give me a second, I'll share this screen. Deloitte showed that digital factory investments have led to an average increase of 10% in production output, 11% in factory capacity utilisation, and 12% in labour productivity. I defy anyone to have a look at their P&L and add 10, 11 and 12% across the board and not be really astounded that that level of money at the moment is, in my view, being left on the table. If we look at how this technology is being applied, for example, in the predictive maintenance space, so no longer reactive maintenance, breakdown based, no longer preventive maintenance in time-based maintenance, and we look at the new science that's coming out in terms of predictive maintenance and being able to predict when equipment might be prone to failure. Nucleus research showed that the potential improvements using predictive maintenance alone, there was a reduction of unplanned downtime by 60 to 90%. There's a reduction in the excess capacity required to make up for that by as much as 90%. And the scrap or rework reduction was improved by up to 50%. And what's important most of all, is the asset life extension. In other words, the lifetime return on assets was improved by 5 to 15%. And once again, these are big numbers. It's not chump change. I mean, imagine we could do this as a manufacturing business and apply predictive maintenance across our business. These are sorts of results that we can expect. And just to broaden the net, the World Economic Forum in 2017-18, I think it was, created a group called the Global Lighthouse Network, and they used McKinsey's as their auditing arm to go and assess companies that wanted to go on this. They call it 4IR here, the Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies at scale. And it's now 153 lighthouses across a range of sectors. What they found, and this gives you an idea of the global map of where these lighthouse manufacturers are located. You can see in the legend there, they've got existing lighthouses, new lighthouses, and the new group of sustainability lighthouses was added in 2022-23. The sad part is in the good old bottom right-hand corner there where we live, there is no one. And I've actually asked 2 companies that I know quite well, do you want to become part of this and become a lighthouse in the Global Lighthouse Network? And sadly, both of them declined, saying it was too hard. So unfortunately, we had the opportunity but declined it. But if you look at these 16 manufacturing metrics across the left here, growth, cost and sustainability, and you can see the range of impact that was observed from the audited results from the start of their journey to when they were last audited, which I think was 2023, 2024. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the blue diamond is where they applied this within the 4 walls of the factory. So if you like, the internal supply chain, where the cyan, the good old light blue, E2E means end-to-end. So those organizations applied Industry 4.0 principles, a digital transformation across the entire supply chain. And you can see, if you look at the numbers on the right-hand side, yeah, the smallest one is 1% for energy efficiency, but none of them go negative. So everybody who went on this journey found some improvement. And there are some ridiculously incredible improvements, like productivity increase at 250%. And if you have a look at the high end of those numbers, there's some extraordinarily substantial improvements about how these organisations have been audited to show the benefits they've gained, from embarking on this journey.
John, they're very good stories, and are and should be a bit of a wake up to the opportunity that's there. But I suppose there's also been times when Industry 4.0 initiatives have failed to deliver, and we can obviously learn from that. I mean, there's one well-known event, which was with General Electric with their Predix platform. Why would an Industry 4.0 fail in General Electric's case?
Well, if we go and back to this is the slide or image that caught my eye back in 2017 from Cisco, that 3/4 of IoT projects are failing. And I was like, holy cow, that means you've got a 25% success rate. What's going on here? And I did some deep reading of this research. And obviously the one you're referring to is the General Electric Predix platform.
Yep. And
reading the results of that and why they suffered, primarily they didn't have a clear project vision, in a sense that it wasn't really roadmap based. tried to eat the metaphorical elephant with one bite. And I think it was a case of biting off way more than they could chew. When you look at the Cisco research, it talks about the 4 key findings. And one of the fundamental ones was it took longer, cost more. The data we wanted, wasn't the data that we expected. So the same old culprits turning up in, typical project management stuff. The second thing was that GE chose partners to support their Predix platform that really couldn't leverage the platform themselves. I don't think they necessarily broadened their net enough and were judicial enough in their choice of business partners to do that. And they also tried to build their own cloud infrastructure, which, considering where we're at the moment with Microsoft Azure, Google and AWS, and the ability to run private clouds, it was quite strange that GE would then, go off on their own tangent and try to build their own cloud infrastructure, which I believed caused them some grief. And one of my chestnuts is, and I'm sure everybody on the call has seen this, you can take the best system and implement it into a business and it can still fail. And the reason is there's a lack of awareness of the necessary alignment between people, process and systems. Most of us here would know SAP quite well. We've often heard complaints about, SAP is a terrible product. Well, guess what? It's not. You look at 80% of the world's major manufacturers, from the Colgates to the Mars to the Nestle to the Bosches to the car industries, and they all run SAP, BHP, Rio Tinto. So there's nothing wrong with the product per se. Usually it's the implementation that's been poor, and it hasn't been the system that's been the issue. It's been that the processes that the business has itself aren't that well understood or well documented. And I know of many cases where people have digitized a broken process only to produce a digital broken process or a broken digital process. And also the requirement for the people piece. Numerous times you hear of organizations buying a system, putting it in almost an autocratic way, only to realize that the people piece, the change management piece, the whole cultural shift of what that means for the organization, the managerial leadership development of the teams has been completely missed. And the old cartoon of what the customer ordered with the swing and what the customer got, then ends up being the result. I mean, the $6 million Queensland Health IBM SAP play that ended up costing the Queensland government 1.2 billion, is one of those classic cases of just a pure lack of alignment between the problem they were trying to solve, the system they put in place, and the result they got.
And another Australian example would be Cochlear, who I think was putting in a smart manufacturing system, and it's been in the media that didn't go well for them. What drove that?
They originally went to market to buy a commercial off-the-shelf manufacturing execution system. I think it was 2 years in, they realised they'd effectively bought slideware and pulled the pin. And once bitten, twice shy. I did nearly a 15-month advisory role with Cochlear through 2023-24, and guided them through some coaching and mentoring on how to build an internal cross-functional team, coach that team into the right questions to ask. We went through the business and established what were the major pain points, aligned the C-suite orientation with the operational orientation, because often there's misalignment between what the factory knows they need or the production area knows they need and what the C-suite thinks they want. And I believe as of the beginning of this year, they've now gone to market and chosen a commercial off-the-shelf medical devices manufacturing execution system. Quite expensive, I believe, but also very, very good from what I've heard. So they learned from their lesson about make sure that whoever you're going to go with, you can reference and see sites that they've completed. And I think the suite they're using has got over 100 happy medical device manufacturers around the world. So it's obviously got pedigree.
That's good. And congratulations on the work at Cochlear. Maybe now let's talk about what might be inhibiting some of the Australian businesses from engaging more with Industry 4.0. And I'd be interested in our guests' views here. So if we can have our second poll. And the second poll is, as it says, perhaps tick as many as you like. Why do you think you and your colleagues in the Australian business are failing to engage in Industry 4.0? John, whilst those results are coming in, why do you think Australian manufacturing is failing to engage in Industry 4.2 to the extent that it should?
I'm often asked, unfortunately, what I believe is the biggest risk to Australian manufacturing. Just as a side note, in 1960, our contribution to GDP was 30%. In 1990 was 14%, and last year was 5.4%. So we've been on a gradual decline. And even now that we have the opportunity, my answer to that question remains the same, and it's one word, and it's apathy. It is organisations not having the visionary leadership needed to know that digital transformation is upon us, whether we like it or not. It's almost like going back to 1960 and saying we're not going to computerize, or going back to 1870 and saying I'm not going to use this newfangled, electrical stuff. I'm going to stick with steam. As a manufacturing, well, what we've got left of it as our manufacturing base, we need to do more to be more proactive and take risk. Unfortunately, the regulatory environment, lack of R&D, government and all that sort of stuff is not, lack of an energy policy has not helped manufacturing. But even still, those that have gone on that journey and embarked on digitisation have made significant gains. In the two factories that Kevin and I worked together, two that come to mind of similar budget, the cost to make the factory smart was between 1.2 and 1.5% of the overall capital spent. Now, when you think about Coca-Cola's injection molding facility with 5 people running their factory floor back in 2011, the year-on-year savings from that are substantial. And that initial 1.5% of capital spend to make it smart and fully integrate that plant in real time so that everybody can see what's happening on the factory floor, and automated processes to capture that data and report on that data and alarm that data or notify someone that the data in the floor is not where it's meant to be, is now being used obviously in the machine learning and the AI space. So you've got to go through that journey and mature as an Industry 4 business in order to then use that information to capitalize on it. And one of the biggest issues we see on the factory floor primarily is that equipment has been purchased without the end in mind. And by that, I mean procurement will get involved. It'll be a race to the bottom for the best price. They'll buy the cheapest machine perhaps, or a slightly not so cheap machine, but certainly not the best machine for the next 10 to 15 years. And then the poor manufacturing people end up with a piece of kit that's an island that they can't mine. They can't get access to the code. It's password protected. And so you can't mine that piece of machinery for the information that you need. So better to buy wisely, better to get a piece of equipment that you can put on the network from which you can extract information, the information that you need, and then put that into a data model. You can then look more holistically at how your production is going.
Yes, John, but surely for a medium-sized business, that fixed cost of embarking on Industry 4.0 is still very high.
No, you can start small. One of the places to start is I ask companies, do yourself a favor if you game and do an Excel spreadsheet audit. That is, how many spreadsheets do your people touch every week, and how many hours, how many different spreadsheets do they touch every week, and how many hours do they spend on those spreadsheets? And that for me is a very simple heartbeat of how functional or dysfunctional the organization is in how it manages the data that it needs to run its business. Spreadsheets come out of necessity being the mother of invention, and those spreadsheets are created because they can't get that data or look at that data in any other way. When I mentioned earlier about an organization I did some work with, and one guy said, I come to work every day, I log on to 6 different systems with 6 different 10-digit passwords that IT says I can't write down anywhere. If I get it wrong 3 times, I have to raise a help desk ticket. He said, if I'm lucky, I get all my extracts, my CSV files, my FLAC files, however that data comes to him from those 6 different systems. And then I put that into my spreadsheet, which is his humongous spreadsheet that he spent years or months developing that has no version control. Is it even accurate? No one really knows. And he said, by lunchtime, I get a graph that shows me I'm where I'm meant to be. and he does that 5 days a week. For me, that is just the most banal, mindless use of and waste of time. He should be able to come to work, have a dashboard on his desk that shows him 5 dials, which is KPIs for his part of the business, 4 of which are green, 1 of which is red, and he goes, that's what I need to focus on today, and apply his continuous improvement mindset, knowing that that's where he needs to focus, rather than wasting his time just being a data collector. So digitizing.
So in the survey, people expressed confusion about where to start. How do we cut through the hype? How do we find the road forward? It
could be as simple as looking at the P&L of the business. Let's say you're a business and you have a large electricity cost. The question the place that I would start is in saying, okay, how hard is it to put some power meters on my power in various distribution boards around my factory, and just see where I'm using that power, or my water, or my gas. I've seen many cases where wastage through air compressors, air leaks, power usage, water usage, gas usage, things starting at 3 o'clock in the morning when they could start them at 6 o'clock in the morning. So lost 3 hours worth of energy usage. They're very simple things as a place to start. The other place is wherever you're collecting paper forms is to digitize those forms. And that could be a simple internal intranet landing page. You have a device, whether it's a phone or an iPad or a tablet, you log onto that page and you collect the data that you need electronically, because at least then you can store that in a database and mine later, rather than have all paper forms that then get lost along the way. I know of one company where a paper traveler, if you like, travels with the piece of equipment that they're making, and it goes all the way through the business. And if that piece of paper gets lost and they see a piece of componentry sitting on the floor, no one's got any idea where it's up to, who's been working on it, and it's an absolute nightmare for them. So it's not that hard to collect the data and digitize it through tablets and iPads and things like that.
So that, John, I'm feeling that gets your toe in the water, that gets some beachhead. But say I'm a medium-sized manufacturing business.
Yep.
What's my structure to actually start to take Industry 4.0 seriously? What are the steps I should sort of work through to get to that point?
Well, I see from the survey, you don't know where to start's the biggest number.
Yep.
And that's because there's no plan. I am absolutely amazed the number of businesses that I speak to in the manufacturing space, and you say to them, do you have a strategy? Do you have any roadmap, any idea of where your business is going to go over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of equipment purchases, digital transformation, data collection, displays, dashboards? And the very large majority say no. There's an adage that says, when you don't know where you're going, any road will do.
Yep.
And I coach companies to basically create the mountaintop being what their business looks like in 3 to 5 years at the summit. And then we work out, well, what are the logical base camps that we'd need to touch along the way? And it's unique to every business. While the problems are very general and not specific, lack of visibility, not enough data, systems aren't integrated, don't know how to get the data out of my equipment. The problems are very common. The context is always unique. And so part of that is the lack of executive sponsorship and leadership, where organizations recognize that this is a journey they must go on. And so what can happen then is that organizations start these little pilots or proof of concept trials at the bottom end of town, effectively down the food chain. And I'll just share this with you. So for years, we've been doing what we call proof of concept projects. That is, can we prove technically that it will work? So the proof of concept approach is a functional test. Is, can we get data, out of a device, collect it, store it, display it, do something with it to make it meaningful? And my answer to that is, we've been doing this for over 30 years. So can we just accept that we're able to collect, store, manipulate and distribute data pretty well easily these days? What needs to shift is the organization's focused from a proof of concept to what's called a proof of value, because ultimately it's the CFO who's going to sign the check or approve the project from a CapEx point of view. And so it's more about now, will it save money? And if so, what's the financial impact of doing this? And in order to do that, we need to have executive sponsorship. If we start from the bottom with a proof of concept trial, and we've seen this over and over again to the point that it's now got a term, and it's known as IIoT pilot purgatory. That is, we've gone ahead, we put some kit in at the bottom end, we might have put a little access database and some screens on a computer, but it's not corporate yet. It hasn't moved up the internal food chain to the top end of the business, to the C-suite. And so 70% of businesses end up being stuck in pilot purgatory. They got all these great ideas about the sorts of stuff that they would like to do, but they don't know whether it's going to be accepted. And there was an absolute classic case of an organisation in a meeting that I was in a few years ago, Kevin, whereby I almost had to leave the room because I thought it was going to turn into fisticuffs because the operations director was talking with his 4 operations managers, and I was in the room coaching the operations managers around proof of concept and changing it to proof of value. And the operations director said, oh, well, you know, our main focus this year is to reduce our $15 million in waste. And one of the guys mounted the table. I thought he was going to deck the operations director. He said, oh, well, that would have been good to know, because all the projects that we've just been discussing here, none of them are about waste reduction.
Is there a trend that you see in mid-sized manufacturing of what they see as the critical areas of benefit?
Lack of alignment.
Like, is waste reduction the symptom? What's the actual critical area of benefit?
So an example of that was an organisation had 100 million P&L. They wanted to reduce, 3 more people across 2 shifts, which might have given them $100,000 a person a year, so say 600 grand worth of savings. But of that 100 million P&L, 60 million was cost of goods. In that cost of goods, 15% was waste. That's $9 million a year. So we suggested, well, how about we forget about the people piece, which is getting harder to do, and we reduce your waste from 15% to 10% and pick up 3 mil, which is a 500% better return than trying to reduce the labour component. And the reason they hadn't focused on that was because when their standard cost model was built, the waste component of that cost model was soft, is the word that I would use. And so when their variance reports would come in each month, they'd be plus or minus variance. So they're like, happy days. We're where we're meant to be. Well, yeah, but you're still throwing away $9 million worth of waste. So we've noticed that very few organisations seem to want to go back and assess their standard cost model and tighten it up a bit and make it a bit of a stretch target to go, well, can we get our 15% waste to 12% and then 10% and then 9% and gradually work our way through? Because in that example alone, there's a significant amount of money being left on the table, but it's almost been normalised. Oh, well, that's just the way the plant works, and that's, as long as we're reaching our variance requirements, we're good to go.
Yep. Maybe it's the right time to ask our participants for their third and final poll. What is it about your business that makes it interested in Industry 4.0? Is it cost or visibility, etc.? Perhaps 2 of the boxes, if you could tick 2 of the boxes.
Sorry, Kevin, we actually ordering them on this one.
Ordering them.
Sorry, yeah, just use your arrow.
Around.
Yeah.
John, the common drivers then that you see? I think John's decided to go home.
Yeah, I think John's just dropped off.
Right.
So we'll just give him a second to redial in. He did have some instability earlier with his internet.
There's a question from Andrew about, are there any government-led initiatives or requirements that challenge businesses around sustainability of gas, electricity, water, waste, etc.? We'll deal with that question in a couple of minutes, if that's all right, Andrew. Are you back, John? Perhaps not.
Yes. We have John. John, I think your mic is, you just turned off. No,
He's been
Okay.
muted. Wow.
I've allowed your mic now. You can actually turn your mic on. Yeah.
Thank you. I was permanently muted. I couldn't unmute myself.
Sorry.
All good.
Is that were those results the sort of results that you expect to see?
I couldn't see the results, so you'll have to refresh them for me, Kevin.
Can you do that for me, please, Vanessa?
My meeting chat is saying only available during the meeting.
Sorry, John. So we have the order that people ranked the drivers was number 1, improving efficiency and productivity.
Yep.
Number 2, reducing costs. 3, increasing real-time visibility. 4, meeting customer demands for customization. 5, staying competitive. And 6, dealing with skills shortage.
Yeah, that's pretty typical, and that's the way we expected that poll to fall. Visibility and reducing costs go hand in hand, because the more we can see, the more agile we can be, the more responsive we can be, the more we're able to, head off issues. One of the things that happens through integration of systems is that we change the time it takes from an event that costs the business money, or when the event happens, to the time that we know about it. An example is a food recall for those in food and beverage. Imagine that the wrong sleeve is put on the wrong ready meal, for example, and that ready meal finds its way to the shelf in Woolies. 2 weeks later, someone takes that ready meal off the shelf, they get it home and they take the sleeve off and they realise it's not chicken curry, it's actually chicken satay, and they have a peanut allergy, so they take it back to Woolies. So Woolies now knows that somewhere in the production process, the wrong sleeve was put on the wrong product, and they got no idea where that is. So that now forms a full shelf recall. And that could be, 2 weeks from the event to the actual occurrence. In one of the jobs that Kevin and I were involved with, we actually put in an inline packaging and label verification system at the end of the process. So every product that was made was scanned to make sure the right sleeve was on the right product. And if we picked the wrong sleeve on the wrong product, we stopped the line at that point. The same issue, the same problem has happened, but instead of taking 2 weeks, it's now 20 seconds. And so by compressing the time through proper integration, you can head off those problems where the time period affects a significant loss of value over time. And so integration, we found, is the key way to make sure that, once again, information is being collected and delivered in a timely manner to the people who need it the most.
So, John, in that scenario, for example, how does that impact on the skills that are required in that workforce?
So automation is obviously a key part of it. Integration and knowing how to integrate is a key part of it. We're seeing a lot of process workers, particularly in the food and beverage industry, replaced over time with more automatic machines, robotics and things like that. And I am seeing, unfortunately, a lack of resources across the board, certainly in the engineering space, mechatronics and areas like that. I spoke to a mechatronics engineer only last week who's 28, and I said to him, stick with what you're doing, because in the way we're going, you're going to have a license to print money. There's a significant lack of uptake of students into engineering degrees in universities, and that's, I think, all filtered down to STEM students, lack of students taking up STEM subjects. And part of the reason, I think, Kevin, is we've not only lost our manufacturing base to 82% from where it was in the 60s. I think it's also, we haven't made manufacturing sexy. We still see pictures on trade magazines of an old bloke in his orange overalls and grey hair, covered in grease, standing at a lathe from the 1950s. It's like, come on, fellas, is that the best we can do? You go to somewhere like Cochlear and you see people in suits in clean room environments making world-class implants, and it's a completely different manufacturing environment.
How does sort of middle management, if you like, stay relevant as Industry 4.0?
Education. Education. That's why Realise Potential was founded in 2017, primarily as an education, coaching and mentoring business to share not only my experiences, but the experiences I've had with other groups and companies. The more I get around, the more I realise the same problems plague almost every business. The context, as I said, is unique, but the issues are pretty well the same. And once organisations start to move around, go and look at themselves, look at benchmarking, see where they're at in terms of other competitors and understand what best practice actually is and looks like. I mean, I'm sure you, Kevin, have known many companies that go, oh yeah, we want to be best practice. Yeah. And you go, well, do you know what that even looks like? You've been here for 30 years. When did you leave these four walls to get outside and see what other more progressive businesses are doing? So part of it is being able to understand where you are in terms of other businesses, and once again, set a roadmap of what you need to do, the steps you need to take, the base camps you need to touch in order to get to your summit.
John, we have a question. Are there any government-led initiatives or requirements that challenge business around sustainability of gas, water, electricity, waste, which ultimately will force manufacturing businesses to focus on areas of efficiency?
Well, only the ESG stuff that's now starting to emerge where, big end of town's already up for it, but the medium to small end of town is going to have to report on greenhouse gas, usage through ESG reporting, which is quite complex. There are a couple of businesses I know of in startup mode that are now offering to provide a suite, if you like, or a solution where it will go and mine your energy providers' information and put that into the properly formatted report so you can submit it to the government. But for me, it's just more bloody red tape that's, making it hard for smaller businesses to compete. But that regulatory requirement, unfortunately, is almost on our doorstep. And that may have the effect of forcing organisations to do stuff. But I think it's not a positive effect. I think it's going to take focus away from the stuff that they really need to fix, which is how they do stuff and how they make stuff, and end up then being more focused on the regulatory side.
And the follow-up question from Andrews is there government assistance in terms of Industry 4.0 to be more on the front foot and proactive?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's the Australian Manufacturing Growth Centre. This current government founded the National Reconstruction Fund Corporation, but my dealings with them have been, unfortunately, very typical of dealing with a large end bureaucracy that doesn't really understand what it is they're there to do. We've had the first CEO lasted 12 months, less than 12 months. The second CEO was appointed in February and comes from a high-risk banking background or risk assessment banking background. It's like, is that really the person that we need to drive an organisation like that? And it's not a grant scheme, it's a loan scheme. And I believe from some organisations trying to navigate the loan application process is quite onerous and not available really to the smaller end of town. Yet again, it's only the big end of town that has the wherewithal to be able to apply for that.
So, John, a starting point is to do some education and to learn. I think you have something to offer there.
Yes. People who attended this and registered for this will get a copy of a co-branded Industry 4 white paper. It took quite a while to build. You, Kevin, were one of the proofreaders of that, and you gave it a good thumbs up. So I was happy for the review. But it's really a white paper that discusses the various ways that organisations can look at the technological options that are available to them, as well as how to do things like metering and sub-metering and the benefits of that. But it's a real broad brush understanding of what Industry 4 is and isn't, and how to apply that to your business to effectively do more with less and become a more sustainable and profitable business.
That's good. I'm sure we will always all look forward to receiving that. Excellent. I think that brings us to our close. We have finished pretty much now on time. And so I'd like to thank all of you for being able to join us today. It's much appreciated. John, thank you for sharing with us the fruits of your experience on this topic and the knowledge that you've gained over your 5-decade career. So that concludes today. Thank you very much and have a beautiful afternoon.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all.